When The King of Queens premiered on CBS on September 21st, 1998, nobody involved could have guessed they were building something that would still be playing in reruns nearly 3 decades later. On the surface, it was a simple blue-collar comedy. A delivery driver named Doug Heffernan, his sharp-tongued wife Carrie, and the cranky father-in-law who moved in and never really left. Filmed in front of a live studio audience at Sony Pictures Studios in Culver City. The show never won major awards and rarely topped the ratings charts the way its network competitors did. But it built something arguably more durable, a loyal, sustained audience that has kept the show in near-constant rotation on cable for almost 2 decades. Underneath that surface simplicity, though, was a cast of actors whose real lives would go on to look nothing like the sitcom stability they played on screen. Some found even bigger fame after the finale than they had during the show's run. Some faced devastating personal loss that the cameras could never have prepared them for. One walked away from a religion in the most public and consequential way imaginable, turning a private decision into an award-winning television franchise. And one, the show's most beloved supporting player, is no longer with us at all. 9 seasons, 207 episodes, and 28 years later, here is where the people behind The King of Queens actually ended up. Not the version of their lives that fits neatly into a highlight reel, but the fuller, messier truth of what happened once the cameras stopped rolling in Rego Park. Kevin James was 33 years old when The King of Queens launched, already a working stand-up comic from Long Island who'd caught a break after befriending Ray Romano and guest starring on Everybody Loves Raymond. Playing Doug, the good-natured IPS delivery driver forever scheming his way around his wife and father-in-law, James turned physical comedy and everyman frustration into a 9-season hit and, eventually, a launching pad into movies. Today, at 61, James is still very much in the game. He's continued starring in and producing broad comedies, kept up his stand-up touring, and remains a fixture of the Adam Sandler comedy circle that produced hits like Grown Ups and Hubie Halloween. Paul Blart Mall Cop, which he co-wrote and produced as well as starred in, became one of the more unlikely box office successes of his career and gave him ownership stakes that paid off long after the theatrical run ended. Financially, James is regularly cited by outlets that track celebrity wealth as one of the richest comedians to come out of the sitcom era, with estimates commonly landing somewhere in the $100 to $120 million range built from his King of Queens salary and back-end syndication deal, his film paychecks, and his ongoing stand-up income. Reports on his early King of Queens contract describe a salary that climbed from around $300,000 per episode in the show's middle seasons to roughly $500,000 per episode by its final years, on top of a producer's share of the show's long-term syndication revenue, the kind of back-end deal that has quietly kept paying him for 2 decades after the finale aired. Whatever the precise number, the through line of his career is consistency rather than reinvention. Where plenty of sitcom stars either fade after their signature show ends or pivot hard into drama to prove range, James mostly kept doing what worked. Relatable, physical, family-friendly comedy, often built around a familiar blue-collar persona. That approach carried him through the Paul Blart franchise, an ensemble run alongside Adam Sandler in films like Grown Ups, a brief return to network television with Kevin Can Wait, and continued stand-up touring that keeps him connected to the same live audience instincts that built his career in the first place. It's not the flashiest model of Hollywood success, but more than a quarter century after King of Queens began, it's proven to be one of the more durable ones. Leah Remini was 28 when she took on Carrie, the fast-talking, quick-tempered legal secretary who gave the show its edge. Her chemistry with James became the backbone of the series, and Carrie's willingness to be genuinely unlikable, jealous, short-fused, unapologetically flawed, made her one of the more distinctive sitcom wives of her era. Remini's life after the show became something the writers never could have scripted. In 2013, after roughly 3 decades as a member, she left the Church of Scientology and did so publicly, later detailing her experience in the best-selling 2015 memoir, Troublemaker, and then co-hosting the Peabody-nominated, Emmy-winning A&E docuseries, Leah Remini, Scientology and the Aftermath, which ran from 2016 to 2019 alongside former Scientology executive Mike Rinder. The series became one of the most talked-about documentary projects of its era, and Remini has continued the work since, co-hosting the podcast Scientology, Fair Game. She said in recent interviews that leaving hasn't brought the organization's scrutiny to an end. She's described ongoing surveillance concerns and a civil harassment lawsuit filed in 2023 involving both her and her daughter, Sophia. In January of this year, Remini lost her longtime collaborator and friend Mike Rinder, who died after a battle with esophageal cancer, a loss she called devastating in an emotional tribute. Amid all of that, Remini reunited with Kevin James for Kevin Can Wait in 2016 and 2017, hosted the game show People Puzzler, and, in a detail that says a lot about how she spent the years since leaving Scientology, went back to school. In 2024, she earned an associate's degree from NYU after describing the experience as one of the hardest things she'd ever done, having been denied an emphasis on education growing up in the church. In 2026, she announced she graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in sociology and psychology. She's called reclaiming that piece of her education one of the most meaningful accomplishments of her adult life, framing it explicitly as something she was taking back for herself after decades inside an organization that, in her account, discouraged its members from pursuing outside education. Even this year, Remini has continued speaking out, including publicly urging young content creators who've taken to filming themselves confronting Scientology properties online to stop, arguing that the stunts create spectacle without accomplishing anything meaningful and hand the organization exactly the victim narrative it wants. It's a small moment, but it captures something true about where her advocacy has landed more than a decade after she left. Less about performing outrage for clicks, and more about trying to actually change how people engage with the subject. Now 56, Remini's post-sitcom story turned out to be less about show business than about a very public, very costly fight to reclaim her own life. One she said, as recently as last year, she's still fighting. Jerry Stiller was already 71 years old and a comedy institution when he joined the cast as Arthur Spooner, Carrie's chaotic, freeloading father. Stiller had built his career for decades alongside his wife, and Mira, as the comedy duo Stiller and Mira, and had recently found a second wind playing Frank Costanza on Seinfeld. Arthur Spooner became, for many viewers, the character they most looked forward to each week. Unpredictable, loud, and somehow lovable despite constantly overstaying his welcome, both in the storyline and, jokingly, in real life. Stiller worked steadily in the years after the show ended, including a cameo in Zoolander 2 in 2016, and remained a beloved figure in comedy circles well into his 80s, continuing to make talk show and award circuit appearances that showed off the same timing that had made him a star decades earlier. He died on May 11, 2020, at age 92, from natural causes, a loss that landed in the middle of the early pandemic, when much of the entertainment industry, and the public more broadly, was navigating grief in isolation rather than through the kind of shared public mourning a figure of his stature might otherwise have received. His passing was felt across two generations of sitcom fans, given his dual legacy on both Seinfeld, where he played Frank Costanza, and King of Queens. In October 2023, the surviving cast reunited for a 25th anniversary special and spoke openly about how much they still felt his absence. Kevin James has said publicly that he wouldn't want to see any kind of King of Queens revival without Stiller, underscoring just how central Arthur Spooner was to the show's identity, not a supporting character so much as the engine that powered a huge share of the show's best-remembered jokes. At 28, Victor Williams stepped into the role of Deacon Palmer, Doug's steady, level-headed best friend and neighbor. Deacon became the calm center of the friend group, someone whose groundedness played well against the chaos surrounding Doug and Arthur, and Williams earned an NAACP Image Award nomination for the role in 2007. Now in his mid-50s, Williams has kept working consistently in television drama, with roles in shows like The Affair, Sneaky Pete, and FBI, Most Wanted, while staying largely out of the tabloid spotlight and based primarily in New York rather than relocating permanently to Los Angeles the way many of his castmates did. That choice alone sets him apart from much of the rest of the ensemble, Williams has built a career that lets him keep working without needing to fully buy into the industry center of gravity. He's spoken in interviews over the years about the narrower range of roles often offered to him in an industry that, particularly earlier in his career, leaned on typecasting for taller black actors, frequently limiting him to authority figures, security personnel, or law enforcement roles, rather than the kind of leading or dramatically varied parts he's clearly capable of. Rather than chase visibility or fight that typecasting head-on, Williams has instead built a long, dependable career on supporting and recurring television roles across some of the more respected dramas of the past 2 decades. It's the kind of steady, less flashy path that doesn't always make headlines, but has kept him consistently employed in an industry where that alone is a genuine achievement. Patton Oswalt was 29 when he joined the cast as Spence, Doug's awkward, oddball best friend whose neuroses and conspiracy theories became a running joke throughout the series. For Oswalt, King of Queens was one part of a stand-up career that was building in parallel. He'd go on to become one of the most respected voices in modern comedy, an Emmy and Grammy winner, and the voice of Remy in Pixar's Ratatouille. Oswalt's life took a devastating turn in April 2016, when his wife, true crime writer Michelle McNamara, died suddenly in her sleep at 46. The cause was later determined to involve an undiagnosed heart condition combined with prescription medication. Oswalt has spoken candidly and publicly in the years since about the grief that followed, about learning to parent their young daughter alone, and about slowly finding his way back to work and to a sense of stability, eventually remarrying in 2017. Rather than retreat from public life, Oswalt leaned into his grief on stage in ways that critics said gave his subsequent specials a rawer, more emotionally honest edge. Now 57, Oswalt remains one of the busiest people to come out of the show's cast. In 2026 alone, he released his 10th stand-up special, Tea and Scotch, describing the material, which touches on parenting a teenager, a cat that appears to see ghosts, and the general anxiety of modern life, as the funniest work he's ever written precisely because he's never felt more overwhelmed. He also toured North America through the summer, signed on as an executive producer for the documentary, In Search of Nosferatu, and continued writing comics for Vault's long-running Money Shot series, on top of maintaining an enormous credit list across film, television, and voice work built up over more than 3 decades in the business. What stands out about Oswalt's arc, more than the sheer volume of work, is how openly he's continued to fold his grief into his art rather than compartmentalizing it. Where plenty of performers might have kept their personal tragedy separate from their public persona, Oswalt built entire specials around processing the loss of his wife and rebuilding a life for his daughter, and critics have consistently pointed to that emotional honesty as part of what makes his later work resonate the way it does. It's a strikingly different kind of legacy than the one Spence Alkin, King of Queens' lovable conspiracy theorist oddball, might have suggested was coming. Gary Valentine, Kevin James's real-life brother, was 38 when he joined the show as Danny Heffernan, Doug's chaotic cousin who periodically crashed into the family's life. As a stand-up comic in his own right, Valentine brought a natural, lived-in rhythm to the role, and he later reunited with his brother again for Kevin Can Wait, and appeared in Paul Blart, Mall Cop 2. Being the real-life sibling of one of the show's stars inevitably brought scrutiny. The assumption, fair or not, that his opportunities flowed through family rather than through his own comedic chops. Valentine has largely responded to that by simply continuing to work, touring clubs, performing stand-up, and staying part of the extended creative circle that built King of Queens in the first place. Now in his 60s, he's kept a lower public profile than his brother, but a steady one, built on the kind of consistent live performance work that doesn't depend on headlines to sustain a career. Nicole Sullivan was 31 when she took on the role of Holly Shumpert, the gentle, somewhat hapless dog walker hired to look after Arthur, a character who started as a guest role in Season 3 before becoming a recurring and eventually main cast member. Sullivan brought a specific kind of vulnerability to Holly that made her stand out even in a small role, and she returned for the show's final episode after being written out for a season. Since then, Sullivan has built a long, varied career that spans live action and animation, including roles on Blackish and Disjointed, plus voice work as Supergirl in DC Superhero Girls. Like many actresses who came up through late 90s and 2000s network comedy, Sullivan has spoken about the pressure that era placed on women in the industry to maintain a specific look, something she's discussed candidly in interviews about her own experience. Now in her mid-50s, she's found a comfortable, sustainable niche in voice acting and recurring television work, a track that has let her stay working steadily without needing to chase the same kind of visibility that defined her 20s. Larry Romano was 35 when he joined the cast as Richie, Doug Streetwise, unmistakably New York friend. Before King of Queens, Romano had already built a solid resume, including a role in Donnie Brasco, alongside Al Pacino and Johnny Depp, and an appearance on NYPD Blue. Romano's arc took an unusual turn partway through the show's run. He left King of Queens to pursue a new sitcom, Kristen, which was canceled after just a handful of episodes, leaving him without the steady platform he'd stepped away from. It's the kind of decision that, in hindsight, looks riskier than